And now,
ladies and gentlemen,
please fasten your seatbelts.
Welcome to PreneurCast.
Business cards being swapped, beers being drunk.
Can I say a nasty word? Can I say procrastination?
With Pete Williams and Dom Kocher.
How well did that go down?
We can talk about that entire thing in a very another rant and soapbox episode if you want to.
Visit us online at PreneurMedia.tv.
Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of PreneurCast with me, Pete Williams, and my trusty sidekick, Tom Goucher. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. Trusty sidekick. We're sticking with that Batman and Robin metaphor, aren't we?
Yeah, well, it's better than partner in crime.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Slightly more racy aspect to it, and possibly less silly outfits. So
yes, I could. Oh, my wingman. That's a bit more. That's a bit racier.
I'm good with that. But before this gets out of hand, let's just get on with it. How's your week been?
Week's been good. Week's been very good. A bit hot again the last couple of days here down in Australia, which is nice, as it should be in summer. But
Hang on a minute. We had like 6 months of don't talk about the weather because it was hot where I was and cold where you were.
Oh, don't I get to make the rules?
This is supposed to be a partnership. Just hang on a minute.
Fair point.
Stick your weather. It's freezing here.
All right, edit that out in post.
Yeah. Don't start that.
I am just pushing all your buttons today, aren't I? We're only about 2 minutes in.
Put that NLP manual down and get on with the podcast.
So last week, good show. I think everyone seemed to enjoy it. Feedback, as usual, is always great.
Indeed. Thank you, everybody. Little detail, folks. Don't forget, we are still in time to get your entries into our little Christmas giveaway. We'll cover that again at the end. I think. But just a reminder.
Sounds good. But I think the Preneur hierarchy kind of resonated with a lot of people, which was great. Sort of helping give some structure and obviously a framework, which is sort of the word of the year for me at the moment, anyway, to people's marketing and giving them a bit more of a structure to go around. Working out where they're spending their money to bring in new business and new leads to their companies and their projects, and I think it was very good. So that was a little self-indulgent, and I think today's episode is probably going to be also self-indulgent. But yeah, so far so good with the episodes this year.
Yeah, no, I think the Preneur hierarchy, other than the self-indulgent name, isn't a particularly self-indulgent thing, and it's very, very helpful. It's one of those things that gives people perspective. It makes you stand back and look at what you're doing. And I think, as you say, frameworks and action plans are our watchwords for the year. And that was a really good one to start with, because it also refers to the first level of the 7 levers of business, in so much as you're looking for traffic. That's what marketing is pretty much all about. Yep,
absolutely.
And so looking at it from that perspective, it does fit in very well with what we've been talking about towards the end of the year. And it's certainly, I think, something that we're going to probably bring to bear a lot more into our mastermind group. We're going to be focusing people with that Preneur hierarchy as one of the very first things that we do. So, yeah, and I also got some good personal feedback from that as well. So it was a good start. So this week, you mentioned last week, and on, as you say, on the thread of self-indulgence, but also on the thread of good lessons, we're going to talk about how you sold the MCG.
Yeah, there's been quite a few emails from listeners who I guess are sort of the first experience of yourself and myself and what we do has come through the podcast due to all the fantastic feedback and stuff we've had on iTunes, which has obviously helped the podcast rank really well and get new people into the community. So a lot of people are probably aware of the tagline that I've had for a while about selling the MCG, which, for those who don't know, is the Melbourne Cricket Ground, also known as Australia's version of Yankee Stadium or Lord's Cricket Ground, for those in the European area. So yeah, I think a lot of people have asked, can they hear a bit more about how that happened and the story behind it, and some lessons and entrepreneurial takeaways that we can share from that experience. So we thought we'd take on the requests and actually do an episode and talk about it.
Great. Well, in this particular case, the stage is all yours.
Okay, so basically, to give some history, the I was living in the United States for about 6 months when I finished university. I sort of took some time off and travelled around the world and did some stuff over there, and came back to Australia and worked with the Athlete's Foot, which is actually a company I've sort of mentioned loosely on the podcast a few times, because they have some great structure and frameworks when it comes to marketing and sales and things like that. So I worked with Athlete's Foot while I was studying at university, and then an excuse for my trip to the United States was to actually again work with the Athlete's Foot over there and kind of get an idea of what they were doing throughout their stores in America to bring back some reconnaissance to Australia. But given that it was winter, and not to go too much down the weather track again, I was making sure that I wanted to spend as much time as I could in the warmer climates of America, and it was over their Christmas period, so I chose Florida and ended up staying at the same store for the whole period of time because I didn't want to actually get anywhere near the snow. So did that, came back to Australia with plans to move back to the US. So took a bit of an interim position again with Athlete's Foot at a relatively new store that just opened up, and was there sort of helping them build that up. And, one of the days was a little bit quieter, so I was reading a book called The 1 Minute Millionaire by Mark Victor Hansen and Robert Allen while I was on the counter. So obviously when you're on the counter, you can't do a whole lot of other admin stuff except for stand there and wait for people to walk in the door. So I was reading the book and read the story of a New Jersey man who bought pieces of timber, or the planks of timber that were the walkway of the Brooklyn Bridge. And he made little certificates up with the history of the Brooklyn Bridge and attached a small piece of that timber. Turned around, got a lot of exposure for that project, sold them for, maybe $20 a pop. And, rumour has it that he made a couple of $1 million out of it because of all the exposure he got. Now, I thought that was just a fantastic idea. And, the little Richard Branson wannabe that I was at the time sort of started thinking about how I could replicate that concept and take the foundation of what that was and apply it here in Australia. I was an avid sports memorabilia collector, and I could kind of see how that all sort of tied together. So just realised that the Melbourne Cricket Ground had just started its renovations. It went under a pretty big renovation here in Melbourne due to the Commonwealth Games that we had here a few years ago. And realised that the seating of the grandstand, or the first grandstand that had been pulled down at the time, was made out of timber. So after making a few phone calls, we were able to get hold of the wrecking company that was doing the demolition and said to them, "Do you have any of the timber? What are you doing with the timber?" And they said, "It's just sitting here in our warehouse doing nothing. If you want to come and buy it, by all means, you're an idiot, but come and buy some second-hand timber, that's fine." But the guy also mentioned that he had a lot of the Melbourne Cricket Club crested carpet available sitting in the back of the warehouse, getting damp and dreary and dringy as well, because the Melbourne Cricket Club was another stand that has since been demolished that was quite iconic. It was very old and very historic, and the waiting list to become a member there is like 50 years or something ridiculous like that. And the dining room part of that members area actually spread across into that first grandstand that got pulled down. So the carpet was very, very ugly, but it had the monogram or the logo of the MCC on there. And I knew again how famous that carpet was. So I fundamentally bought all the carpet and a little bit of the timber sight unseen with a friend's credit card at the time, because my credit card was completely maxed out after my US trip. And then went down the following day to actually double check it all and put on the back of a courier company or a courier's van and snatched it all up. So that's sort of, I guess, the premise behind it all and how it all came about. And I guess if we sort of tie it back to lessons and stuff, which is what the question that spurred us on to do this episode, I guess the key lesson out of that first thing is that from the moment I read that chapter to actually picking up the phone and started tracking down the wrecking company, I would say was no more than 10 or 15 minutes. It was basically had this idea and thought, okay, I'm going to take action on this straight away, and started making those phone calls. So that was sort of, I guess, the first key lesson out of all of that to begin with anyway.
Wow, that's quite amazing. I mean, we do talk all the time about taking action, about implementing things, giving things a go. But that's amazing. So it was very cool. So that's how it sort of, I guess, kicked off. And from there, being a sports memorabilia collector and
and that sort of as a side hobby or passion, I kind of realised that we could easily frame up a picture of a photo of the MCG with a piece of that crested carpet. So cut out the monogram and the logo and get that framed up with a small plaque outlining the history of the MCG, with obviously a bit of a limited edition number as they always do with sports memorabilia. And given my skill set, I am not a carpenter on any level. So basically found a memorabilia company who was quite local at the time, that had worked out of his garage at home actually, and had a retail store in the main street of the town I was living in at the time. And I bought quite a bit of signed memorabilia and unframed stuff while I was in the States. So I already had a relationship with this guy who was framing up all those, signed boxing gloves and signed photos and bits and pieces like that. So got a hold of him and sort of coordinated it. So he'd obviously do all the manufacturing, because I just had no skill set around that. My next door neighbour at the time was an ex-carpenter, so he cut all the timber that we purchased into the frame. So the actual frame itself, for a limited edition number of those pieces, was actually framed out of the timber that was the MCG, as well as having the carpet piece in the whole piece that was being sold. So he was able to do that, had the timber and the carpet literally just sitting at this framer's home garage, and he basically made the frames on an on-demand type basis, which was really nice.
Cool. And another lesson there, which is outsourcing.
Yeah, exactly. That was my first, I guess, real world experience with outsourcing, in that I didn't have that skill set in place, but I didn't let that stop me, for one of a better sort of analogy there, in that what we actually did is, even a bit of a high lesson, and we can kind of see how this all fits in, is that with the sales, every sale was with a 2 to 3 week delivery and lead time, which gave us enough time to actually produce the frame and send it to the recipient, and meeting that demand. We actually set their expectations up front, saying, due to the demand of this, it's going to be 2 or 3 week delivery time from your order. So please bear with us in terms of delivery. So that actually set the expectation right for the end purchaser, so they weren't wondering where their goods were. Obviously, we had a limited amount of carpet, so we weren't selling something that we didn't already have, and people were aware that the frames were being made as we were going because of the demand. So what that actually meant was that I got paid up front. So we charged the credit card the price of the frame before we even had the actual production underway. So that way I was able to make the whole project cash flow positive from day one. So that way, we got the order in, and I literally had that order, sent the details through to the framer, who then made the frame, boxed it up, packed it up, and the courier came and picked it up from the framers, and still does now. It's now a different framer for the frames we're still selling. And I didn't have to do anything. I could literally, for one of an analogy that's been used over and over again, sit at home in my underwear and run my business.
Well, that's basically drop shipping.
Exactly. It's outsourcing and dropshipping the whole thing.
How old were you?
I just turned 21.
And after reading this book, seeing the opportunity, you made the call, you went down there, you got the carpet, you put all the different processes in place, and you actually hadn't really done that much work, had you? I mean, you'd done the thinking, you'd done the legwork to go get the carpet, do the deal, and you'd found the people, but that was it.
It was basically just project management. Was probably the best cap you could probably put on my head, if you want to look at it that way, is as a project manager, I was just coordinating the whole project so it would run smoothly.
Amazing.
And then had that system in place, that framework in place to then focus on the marketing, because from my perspective, it wasn't about the product so much. Obviously, we had a great framer and still work with great framers who look after all of that and put a great product together. But for me, it wasn't necessarily about the product. It was about marketing the product and getting. And
that's what I really, and that's what I love about this story is that there's two halves to it. There's the taking action and the process that you did to put the opportunity together, the thing that you can sell, the product. Yeah, and how you leveraged everything to get that done. But the other part that is equally as interesting, if not more interesting, to a lot of our listeners, but it is the marketing. But I just don't want people to overlook that first part, the making of the product, the having the idea and then bringing in the people to get it done, to leverage what you've got. You did the project management, you found the people, you knew what you wanted them to do, but you got the experts to do it, including building and shipping.
Yeah, and
which is go on.
I was going to say that, and that's the part of the story that I haven't shared as much as the other side, because obviously, you know, the sexy side of all this is that, you know, I found the idea and I turned around and sold it, and we'll get into all that in a moment. But there's the real sort of, I guess, business lessons, which, you know, are kind of boring for the general public, so to speak, such as how we were able to structure that business. And I say we because I did have a partner in that who sort of helped me get the credit card to access to buy the carpet originally, and sort of, you know, had a bit of time on his hands to actually help coordinate and all that sort of stuff. So a big shout out to Bruce, who I know listens to the podcast as well. So the business was structured very, very particularly for those reasons, because, you know, I didn't have the skill set of making the frames. I didn't have the time to make the frames, or time necessary to do the deliveries and stuff like that, because I was still working at Athlete's Foot, you know, 35, 40 hours a week. So it was really a deliberate structure set up, because it was, you know, almost the limitations forced us to put the business in place that way and build the system around it, because of the limitations that we had.
Absolutely. And I think the great thing about this is that it's got so many parallels in so many different businesses. It's not just that it was a physical thing that, obviously, well, you're not a carpenter, obviously you can't make it yourself, blah, 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 blah. You know, this maps all the way up to, say, what you and I do, in what I do for you in your business right now, where you actually could do some of the things that I do in terms of the media production, but now you have all the businesses that you've got to run. You're still at that project manager level. You're coming up with the idea and the core content. We're talking now back to the content leverage system piece that you did for the Noble Samurai guys, if anybody's interested in looking at that. But your input into that process, once you've designed the actual concept of the product, is just to sit down with a mind map and record some audio. You put that initial piece of effort in, and then after that, you've put together a team of people that convert it and mould it and build it and make it into the actual product, albeit video, audio, text, things like that, and distribute it for you. So you've taken exactly the same concept and looked at your business and how you can best what you can best put into it, and what you also there don't need to get involved in, and you've outsourced the rest. So it's an incredibly valuable business lesson to look at opportunities from that point of view, in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure I don't take that as a backhanded compliment to saying that I'm lazy. But so moving on from, I guess, the structural side of things, which was really important for the success of it for me, is obviously the whole marketing side of things as well. And I guess the real key driver, at least for the initial influx of sales by any means, was the mass media exposure I was able to get from that. I wrote a press release with the headline, 21-year-old sells the MCG for under $500. And sent that out to a whole bunch of media outlets around Australia, and got so much radio coverage, so much metropolitan newspaper coverage, some TV coverage on the national news, and that was just a huge wave of exposure that not only obviously got traffic, so to speak, to the business, but it was also a great way to sort of build the brand around the the MCG project, and also my brand to a certain extent as well, which was just fantastic.
I love that headline. It's absolutely it's a classic headline from the good old days of advertising and marketing. But the more interesting thing there, and I think the thing that I think quite a lot of listeners at that point will have gone and literally have stopped dead in their tracks. You offhandedly said, and I sent a press release out. And I know, you and I worked on your Going Analog product, which was my really detailed look into how you do these things. But it's not as hard as people think, is it?
No, it's not. And it's probably worth a whole episode in its own right about publicity and stuff. And like a lot of people these days are sort of, teaching PR and that sort of stuff. And I think it's a very valuable tool. And we can definitely, let's do next week's episode. We'll delve into PR on a much deeper level, and we can kind of really sort of lay out the foundation and how to actually get that exposure for a business creatively, being proactive, and also some really cool ways to be reactive and get media exposure as well, which is something that a lot of people don't talk about too. So we can definitely delve into that next week on the PreneurCast.
Cool. That'd be great because, as I said, I just flagged that. I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but I flagged that because people, I know for myself, if before I'd met you and before I'd studied some of the stuff that you've done, if somebody said, "Oh, and just do a press release," that'd be it. I'd switch off.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So and understandable. So we'll delve into it there. But that was definitely the big crux for the initial launch. Anyway, was the exposure that press release got me, and it was fantastic. So that was a good wave. And then obviously had a website and did all the sort of the usual marketing kind of stuff. Probably not to the same level that I do these days, and definitely not doing these days. I think we did leave a lot of exposure and a lot of traffic on the table. We did do some very traditional magazine adverts. Definitely the Preneur hierarchy wasn't around as a framework to lean on, so we sort of had the PR sort of stuff, but then jumped very much to almost the high-end pointy part of that pyramid there, and did some media exposure with some advertisements, and it completely bombed, absolutely bombed. So that was a good lesson very early on to sort of make sure that you target the bottom high ROI elements of the Preneur hierarchy before you sort of go and do mass media advertising, because it's just definitely a waste of cash in most circumstances.
Definitely, and not only just a waste of cash, but also it's so difficult to track it by comparison.
Yeah, well, exactly right. So that was a good lesson, and we can continue to sell the frames now, and actually did a relaunch of the whole project about probably 18 months, maybe 12 or 18 months ago now. Did a quite a significant relaunch of all of that, which was a huge success second time round, and kind of did it a completely different way, which was very cool.
And that's been almost half the questions from my side, looking at the feedback about this, have been, okay, well, you did this quite a few years ago now, and then you did the relaunch, and then the questions have been around, what did you do differently the second time round, and also, if it's different, what would you do differently again if you did it now? That's one of the things that I'm interested in, because you've learnt a lot, as you said. The first time round, you did the spray and pray with the magazine adverts, and you've learned something from that. The origins of the Preneur hierarchy even came out of that.
Absolutely.
So what did you learn? What did you apply second time round? Yeah,
sure. Well, it's a bit of a loaded question too, Max. We've been working on the third relaunch. That's a slightly loaded question, but I like where you're going with that, mate. So in terms of what we did the second time round is we did a traditional product launch. So if you go back and listen to some previous episodes of PreneurCast, I'm not quite sure what episode number it was, but we actually did a whole episode on product launches, and I think we sort of touched a little bit on the relaunch that we did for the MCG stuff. So what we did in a nutshell, not to sort of recap too much about or regurgitate stuff we've already covered here on the show, but I did a traditional launch where I had a squeeze page. There was a website page we set up over at owntheg.com.au, and had a video there with me just sort of explaining what the project was all about and how people had the opportunity to own a piece of the Melbourne Cricket Ground. It's going on sale in a couple of weeks. It'll be open and launched shortly. If you want to get on the early bird list and have access to the frames before the general public, there's only X amount of frames going to be available. Put your name and email address onto this website now, and you'll be on that pre-release notification list. And then that was fundamentally the start of the launch, and sent a lot of traffic to that site by doing forum advertising, online banner advertising, a little bit of pay-per-click sort of stuff from an AdWords perspective, and drove a lot of traffic to that site. Did a little bit of PR again and got some exposure on radio and some print media as well, second time round, using just a slight tweak of that original press release. And drove a lot of traffic to that site originally, and built up a brand new community from scratch in a very short period of time. And then over that 2-week period, as we got everything in place to do the relaunch, because we changed framers, I moved from the old framer to another framer, larger framer who could handle a lot more demand at a cheaper price point, closer to me where I am now in Melbourne, and got all those systems in place as well to get all that organised, and made sure they will be able to do the same sort of structure that I wanted, in that they'd actually be doing stuff like boxing and delivering and all that sort of stuff for me too. So I made sure that was in place. But over that 2-week period, what we actually did was do a number of marketing pieces to the community to build up that demand, let them get exposure and excitement around the availability to own a piece of the MCG. So did videos of me at the framers discussing with the framer the frame being made so people could actually see the high quality frames and the love and care that went into making their piece of Australian sporting history. Wrote some emails back and forth explaining all the comments that we've been getting and feeding that back into the community. Did a really fun video where I actually jumped onto a bunch of competitors' websites, other people who sell sports memorabilia, and did a video of me walking through their websites going, look at this, it's a manufactured cricket bat signed by the athlete. There's 2,000 of them and they're selling them for $1,500 each. It's completely manufactured. There's no authenticity in this really. Yes, the autograph's personally signed, that's authentic, but the limited edition-ness, for want of a better word, has been manufactured. Whereas the MCG carpet, the piece of history you're going to own shortly, is going to be available, is 100% authentic sporting history. It's not a manufactured piece on any level. So sort of built up that demand, set the price point expectations quite high of what other people who are selling this, manufactured, I've got to be careful with the word I use, the manufactured sports memorabilia is selling quite a high price point. So when I showed them that, hey, here's a chance to own something authentic at a much cheaper price point, it was just an obvious, easy purchase for them to make because they felt like they were actually, buying savings or buying money at a discount is what Dan Kennedy refers to it as, because they were buying something that should be valued at a lot higher or is valued at a lot higher. So they'd be silly not to do that because they'd actually be leaving money on the table, and that's the whole selling to sales mentality. So that's sort of how we did that, and did that 4 or 5 piece marketing sequence leading up to the launch of it. And then obviously the day that the frames are ready to be made available and had the shopping cart open, obviously had quite a lot of demand built up and sold a significant number of the frames in that first sort of 4 or 5 hour period because the demand was built up, the relationship with that community that I made was built up, and they were absolutely limited edition pieces of history that were at a very, very good price point.
Excellent. I love the fact that second time round you applied a lot of the product launch stuff that we talked about. It was episode 27, by the way, that we talked about the product launch. I'll put a link in the notes. But I think it made a difference, a significant difference. And I just want to talk about a couple of those things from different perspectives. First of all, the building, the anticipation, I think was quite a significant part of that, and those sales. But also involving and building like a miniature community by talking to them, by communicating with them, by being quite open. Really, I've looked at a lot of the media that you produced, and it is that kind of insider knowledge, the behind the scenes. Look at what we're going to give you. Really giving them an experience of the product before they actually get it. And these are all things that are important when you're doing marketing. They're all big marketing lessons. And you managed to kind of cram them all into this one launch. The other thing, and I'm always big on this, I am. The other thing in there, you very offhandedly say twice, oh, and I did a video. What I think is great about those videos is one of them, the one where you talk about the other people's websites, is literally a recording of your computer screen, which you can get a standard piece of software to do. You can use something like Camtasia on the PC or ScreenFlow on the Mac, or there's hundreds of pieces of software now every day coming out that will let you do that very, very easily. And you literally just sat at your computer, went to a website, and talked about what was in front of you. Yep. That was it. And when you went to the framers, again, I mean, what you probably had a flip camera back then.
It was
maybe.
Indeed. Yep.
But these days, iPhone or your favourite Android device has a perfectly sufficient camera to just do one of these. Everybody accepts it's a behind the scenes thing, and I'm going to say it now. I've been dying to say it, but all this is about framing. I'm sorry. It's been there. But psychological framing. We talk about it a lot. But everything that you've been doing has been about framing. you let people know that this was a behind-the-scenes video. So they expect shaky camera. They don't expect perfect lighting, microphone, and full camera crew. They expect you on your camera phone going in and chatting to this guy who looks like a deer in the headlights because he's never been in front of a camera before. You tell them you're looking at a website. That's what they expect to see. Nobody expects perfect production if you frame it. And then all this goes towards the big frame, which is, as you said, look what people are manufacturing out there at this price. This is an accepted piece of sports memorabilia in the marketplace. This is a popular piece. It sells well for this price at this quality level. I'm going to exceed that quality level. In fact, I'm showing you I've exceeded the quality level because you can see me making it, and I'm not going to charge you that price. And the implication there is, but I should.
Yep.
It's just a fantastic setup. A great example of framing and positioning, a great example of building a tribe, building anticipation. It's just really, honestly, you need to go back and listen to this again almost if you haven't been taking notes, to just write down and look at it and identify all the things that we've probably talked about up until now in all of our podcasts. I think this one thing embodies pretty much all of those things.
It just really was very much planned out to have all the elements we cover in various episodes into that marketing launch, and it was a huge success. I think a key part of that was Robert Cialdini's influence factors as well. That video was where I sat in front of the computer screen and showed at competitors' websites, covered a lot of things that Cialdini talks about in his book Influence. And, social proof showing that, this memorabilia piece was sold out. There was 1,000 units produced, manufactured, 1,000 of them that sold for $1,500 each. It proves there's demand in this marketplace for, in my opinion, subpar memorabilia. So imagine what the demand's going to be like here. We covered off a lot of that sort of stuff. Commitment and consistency was there in a lot of elements as well. Social proof, demand, all that sort of stuff. It was just covered off a lot. And I think, after we do publicity next week, let's actually go and actually really delve into Cialdini's influence factors and actually talk about it in a couple of different ways. We can kind of give a lot of examples for people how they can use the influence factors in different pieces of marketing. We can talk about it from the MCG relaunch. We can talk about it from online marketing. We can talk about using Cialdini's influence factors as a filter or as a framework for picking marketing tools. So there's a number of different ways we can talk about the influence factors, because that is a key underlying thing in that launch as well.
Oh, that's going to be absolutely fantastic. I've been waiting for this, because you are great at implementing those influence factors. But one thing I also just want to say, because what we've done is we've taken a product launch there, going out to the regular customers, regular people on the street, and we've broken it down and we said, and we did this on purpose, we did this on purpose, we did this on purpose. And what I get from this, and this is something that comes back to a question somebody else was asking in a forum I was on earlier on today. If you look at the MCG launch both times round, if you stand back from it, you don't know me, you don't know Pete, and you've no history in this, and you look at the MCG launch, I don't think you would necessarily have spotted the intentional marketing tactics that were used. And this is why I really, really like this, Pete. This is why I really like this as a benchmark example of how to implement some of these tactics, because it was a planned out launch. It was a planned out marketing campaign, but it doesn't look like implemented sales tactics. It doesn't look like intentional mind twisting psychological tricks, because it wasn't. You were genuinely informing the audience. You were genuinely giving them information that would help and inform them in the sale. You were basically doing another thing we talked about briefly, is consultative selling. But you were doing it in a structured manner. So instead of being a scummy marketer who's scheming against his potential customers, which is how a lot of marketing is perceived, and this is a big thing for me. It's really important that this comes out. A lot of people perceive sales and marketing as a scummy thing that you do to take money off people that wouldn't otherwise give you money. And the MCG launch was just a structured marketing approach to inform people so that they could decide whether they wanted to or not. And yes, you used influence techniques to encourage them and to keep them in the funnel, but that was it. I just think it was a positive example of marketing and sales, using sales and marketing tactics that we've talked about. And it is important, because some people are against this idea. Some people are against using marketing tactics, in inverted commas, because of that. And I personally think that if you can do it ethically and do it well, then there's no need to be against it, because you're in business.
Absolutely. I think you summed that up perfectly. And this is, I guess, to sort of answer the second part of your question is where is it going now? What's happening next with the MCG stuff? And what I'm trying to work out a way to do ethically, as you just so clearly define there, is work out a way to make that launch what's termed evergreen. So when someone comes to the owntheg.com.au site in the future, they get that squeeze page again and go through that same launch sequence before they're actually able to buy the frame. Now, obviously, I have to work out the right way to frame each of those videos and each of those emails and each of the steps in that launch sequence. So they go through that they understand, or it's at least clear for those who want to see it, that this is an evergreen launch. It's not actually a closed sequential launch or a dated launch like the original one that we did last year was. That no matter when they come to the site, if it's 2 a.m. on a Saturday or it's 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, that they opt in and get those same emails in a automated sequence 1 day, 2 day, 3 days after that they actually opt in. So that's one thing we're trying to work on at the moment is make that launch sequence that worked so effectively transparent and ethical, so it can be evergreen. And that's, I think, what a lot of people don't do when they actually turn their launch sequences evergreen, is they still say that they use the incorrect language that can be easily misconstrued and misleading to say that this is not going to be released to the general public for 4 more days, whereas actually it has been released. It's just not available to you right now until you go through my marketing sequence. So there's what we're trying to work on at the moment is a way to do that, and we'll mention it on a future podcast when it's actually evergreen and available, that people can actually go through it and experience it themselves, to actually sort of see what it's like and actually to sort of experience from the consumer side of things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that would be a great thing for people to have a look at. And it's a tip anyway. Is to go through other people's marketing sequences. It's something that we haven't really talked about, but if you want to see how people do it, well, go and have a look how people do it. Sign up, go to their websites and go through the process. Obviously, don't necessarily buy the product, as it were, but go through, get on their mailing lists, and see what other people are sending out. See if you can learn something from it. All of this started because Pete, you read that business idea from the book, the 1 Minute Millionaire. That was one business idea that you read. You took it, you ran with it, you found another opportunity. Where you can find marketing ideas by looking what other people are doing.
Yep. Exactly, and let's get a bit granular, a bit techie in terms of a good idea of how to actually make that email sign up effective without clogging your inbox. This is sort of, I guess, completely off topic, but very granular and tactical, which I know a lot of listeners really like, the sort of tactical, implementable workflow, profit hack type thing. So one thing that a lot of people don't know is what you can do with Gmail if you're using a Gmail account is actually add a parameter to your email address that fundamentally gives you a second or new email address that you can apply a filter to. So let me walk through that to actually give some understanding to what I just said then. Let's say, for example, your email address is preneuradmin@gmail.com. That's your email address. And what you want to do, you want to sign up to a marketing list to learn from or swipe and deploy. Swipe some of the tactics they're using and deploy them in your own campaigns. So what you could do, if you actually sign up to that marketing sequence with the email address preneuradmin +swipe@gmail.com, that email address will still actually work for you. That'll still come to your normal Preneur Group Gmail inbox. But what you can do then inside Gmail is set up a filter whenever an email comes through with that +swipe parameter to automatically filter that out of your inbox and put it into another folder or label marked swipe file. So it's not there in your inbox to clog up your day-to-day proactive time management or critical focus or GTD type process, but it's there for you to look at on a Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock when your critical focus time is to actually swipe and deploy. So you then go into that folder and see what's coming in that scenario. So that's, I guess, a real granular way to implement that without it getting and affecting your current workflow.
Absolutely. I actually got that tip from Merlin Mann a huge number of years ago for tidying up inboxes by adding the little plus after your original name and then putting something in there. And I use it all the time. But just to really add the detail, just because I want to not be so vague about certain things. First of all, folks, if you don't have a Gmail account, they're free. And if you're going to sign up for other people's stuff, get a Gmail account, really, and then it really does isolate. If you're already using a regular address, me@mydomain.com, then even better, create a Gmail account, and that can be your marketing and research one, and it keeps it off to the side until you allocate the time to go and do your swipe and deploy, as Pete said. So that's one thing. But if you're already using Gmail and it's your primary email address, then once you put into their autoresponder box, enter your email box, Preneur admin plus swipe at gmail.com. In your email account, because Gmail have really upgraded this now, you can very, very easily you can create what's called a filter, which is a way of getting things straight out of your inbox. And it can actually now be done from the search box at the top of the Gmail window. You literally type the search in, and there's a little down arrow at the right-hand side. Now I'm getting really technical, but it's actually not, because you can do this while you're listening. There's a little down arrow on the right-hand side that most people don't see of that search box. You drop that down, it drops a box down, and at the bottom of that box it actually says, create filter with this search. And that's it. You can then set up for it not to hit the inbox, for it to have stars against it, whatever. You can use filters. Very powerful tool for lots of different things. But to implement this very specific thing, you literally just go to Gmail, type in the address that you just gave to that opt-in box, click the little down arrow on the right-hand side of the search, and hit create filter with this search, and tick the options you want it to do. That's it. And you're done. And it won't go straight into your main inbox. You can get it to go away to one side for later processing, and away you go. So that's a great tip, Pete. Yeah. That's really good.
And I think that leads us perfectly into our action tip for the day. I reckon we should encourage people to set up some sort of swipe and deploy filter in their marketing. Maybe they're in. You could have Preneur admin plus sign newsletters. So all your newsletters that you subscribe to, except for our one, of course, because ours is clearly the most valuable that you should get, and you should be reading it every single day when it comes into your inbox. But everybody else, it's distracting you from your goal because they don't give you frameworks and action points and things like that. Move them out of your inbox using a filter, or set up some swipe and deploy type campaign. Set up a competitor one, plus competitor, and sign up to your competitors' newsletters. And set up these filters automatically to allow you to capture the information that's there as a resource for you in the future without actually clogging up your inbox and your workflow. So that's this week's action point for you.
Yeah, and folks, don't worry, by the way, that you're putting something into a box like plus swipe, that somebody's going to read it and be offended. This is an automated system, okay? That email goes to a computer server somewhere, maybe Aweber or MailChimp or whatever, and it ticks an electronic box somewhere, and you get put on a list. Nobody's ever going to read it, and so what if they do? Okay? So you can put competitor in there if you want, you put swipe in there. But yeah, great action point. My other one, and just to emphasise this, this is kind of an every week one, especially if you're new to the podcast, is if you go to preneurmarketing.com, Pete's main website, you can sign up to Pete's email newsletter. But if you sign up to Pete's email newsletter, you'll get access to a free audio version of Pete's book. which goes through everything that we've just talked about, the whole selling of the MCG, but it puts it all in context as he goes through it. So instead of a 40-odd minute podcast with all the lessons crammed in, this is a whole book where it's all broken down, and Pete talks about the origins of the preneur hierarchy and lots of stuff about publication and publicity. There's loads and loads of information in there. Definitely worth a sign-up just to go and get that. So that's kind of my extra regular action for you to go and take.
Thank you for that one, mate. So, yeah, PreneurMedia.tv is the home of the podcast, where you can get all the show notes, listen to back episodes, leave comments, leave questions. We've enabled the Facebook comment section on the website as well. So if you do listen and have some questions and want to make it a public question that you think other people would get value from, please leave your feedback and your comments on there. Speaking of feedback and comments, iTunes is something that we'd love you all to do. It helps us get more exposure for the show and get more people into the community. And we'll see you next week for another edition of PreneurCast, where, as we promised 20 minutes ago, we'll be covering publicity. So we'll talk about a bit more about how the publicity for the MCG venture was generated, and also some of the key lessons that you can go and take action on in your own business.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking out for that for next week. Looking forward to that, definitely. And folks, look out for an announcement about our next round of 7 Levers business and what we're going to do about that. So looking forward to hearing your comments about this week's episode on iTunes or on PreneurMedia.tv, and we'll see you next week.
See you guys.
You've been enjoying another fine episode of PreneurCast with Pete Williams and Dom Gosher. Make sure to hang out with the boys online at PreneurMedia.tv or drop them a line via PreneurCast@PreneurGroup.com.